Welcome back to Sleepy Lorekeeper. Tonight, we drift through the void toward a place where time itself tolls like a morning bell. This is the story of Cypra Mundi, the fortress at the edge of eternity, where every chime marks a soul lost to the warp, and where silence has become the rarest sound of all. There is a sound that never stops. It rolls across the metal plains and the spires of the citadel like the breath of some dying god. Deep, resonant, patient. A bell, one of many. I have lived beneath their toll for so long that I no longer remember the first time I heard it. On Cypra Mundi, the sound of the bells is the sound of life itself, though life here is not measured in beating hearts or in the turning of suns, but in loss. Each note is a dirge, each vibration a passing soul. We are the watchers of that loss. The last station before the storm. Cypra Mundi orbits the edge of a wound in reality, the perdition rift, a churning scar of warp storms that stretches across half the segmentum solar like a malignant sea. When the Imperium grows restless, the storms swell and howl against the void shields, tearing auroras of blood-red light across the horizon. From the observation balconies, it looks like the gods themselves are breathing just beyond the glass. The citadel is vast, a continent of Gothic iron anchored in orbit, carved with 1,000 chapels and vox choirs, its towers jutting into the darkness like the fingers of a dying saint reaching for salvation. The bells hang from these towers, some small and bright as chimes, others large enough to eclipse a thunderhawk in their shadow. They toll by machine, not by hand. Each one is connected to the lament engine, buried deep in the planetary crust, where the data of 1,000,000 warp transits flow through the sacred cogitators. Every time a ship fails to emerge from the warp, its signal lost, its light extinguished in the Astronomican's reach, a bell tolls. That is the purpose of Cypra Mundi. We are not a fortress of war, though we are armed. We are a fortress of remembrance. There are records that say the bells once tolled only on the death of saints and primarchs, long before the Imperium grew weary of counting its own dead. But now they toll constantly, hour upon hour, thousands of chimes each day, sometimes overlapping until they become a single, ceaseless tone that trembles through the metal bones of the citadel. The sound passes through everything, through the walls, through the lungs, through thought itself, until even dreams begin to ring. I have heard it for centuries. I have recorded every name that accompanied every tone, and I have never grown used to it. I am the keeper of echoes, though that title means less with each passing year. I was once a scholar of void transit phenomena, trained on Luna in the early years of the reborn Navis academies. When my sight failed, not the eyes themselves, but the ability to see meaning in the data, I was sent here to Cypra Mundi, where sight is not required. Here we listen, and we remember. Each morning, if one can call the passage of light through filtered atmospheres, morning, I walk the cloisters of resonance, a kilometer-long corridor lined with brass plates engraved with names, every ship, every crew, every life lost to the warp since the bells began tolling. The plates shimmer faintly with oil and condensation. Some are warm, humming with residual psychic trace, as if the names themselves still live faintly in metal. Others are cold, dark, forgotten. Sometimes I stop and press my palm to the metal. I whisper the name etched there. The plates never answer, but the air around them seems to change, as if the void listens when we speak softly enough. At the end of the cloister stands the chapel of the Last Tone, the largest bell chamber in the citadel. It is said that its largest bell, the Mortis Ultima, has not rung since the days of the Great Crusade. It is reserved for the death of an entire world, for the extinction of something irreplaceable. But lately, I have heard its chain stir, only faintly, like the rustle of an old man's breath. Perhaps it is my imagination. Perhaps not. The sound of the bells carries through the void by graviton relays, transmitted to every listening post in orbit, so that even the smallest outpost at the system's edge can hear the death it represents. The tone varies slightly each time. Higher frequencies for lost pilgrim convoys, deeper tones for military fleets. But lately, there have been tones that do not match any pattern. They come irregularly. At night, mostly, though night on Cypra Mundi is only the brief dimming of lumen arrays. The sound arrives not through the relays, but through the walls themselves, vibrating the air at a frequency below hearing, felt rather than heard. When they come, the other bells falter, as if pausing to listen. The first time I noticed, I thought it was feedback in the Vox harmonics, a simple mechanical fault. But the second time, I heard something else beneath the tone. A shape. A suggestion of words, too slow and deep to understand. A whisper that seemed to speak not to my ears, but to the memory behind them. I told the Arch-Litany Master. He smiled, patient as old parchment, and said such anomalies were common. "The dead do not speak, brother," he said. "They are remembered. That is all." He turned back to his scrolls. The bells rang again, and I thought I heard laughter in the distance, not mocking, but weary. In the lower strata of the citadel, beneath the spire-ward cathedra, there are maintenance tunnels where the walls sweat with condensation and the sound of the bells grows thick and heavy. The acolytes who work there call it the weight of remembrance, the pressure of so many echoes reverberating through the structure. They say that if you stay too long, you begin to hear the voices of those you've lost. I believe them, because I have heard mine. Her name was Lirael, a void-farer on one of the Chartist vessels I studied in my youth. She vanished into the warp 200 years ago, her ship swallowed between the tides. When her bell tolled, I felt the air change, the same way it does now. And sometimes when I pass the 7th bell tower, and the wind carries its resonance through the ducts, I could swear I hear her voice between the waves of sound, not as she was, but as memory paints her. Gentle, distant, unfinished. Perhaps that is the truth of it. Perhaps the warp does not devour us. It only scatters us into echoes. And here, at the edge of the storm, we have built a cathedral to listen for them. Each night, the aurora burns brighter beyond the void shield horizon. The warp pushes closer, a tide of unreality pressing against the last wall of reason. The technicians in the upper spires say the readings grow unstable, that the bells are beginning to toll even when no ships are lost. I record them anyway. Each tone, each variation, each impossible sound. The night before last, the bells tolled 17 times in unison, every tower, every chime, every mechanism synchronized by a force no machine could dictate. The air shook so hard, the glass of the high balconies shattered. The sound lasted nearly an hour. When it faded, the horizon of the warp storm glowed white, and for a single breath, I thought I saw silhouettes moving within it, shapes like ships or cities or souls. The data from the outer probes confirmed nothing. No vessels lost that day, no anomalies in the Astronomican's signal, no measurable cause. Yet the bells tolled, and deep inside me, something shifted. A small, inexplicable certainty that the dead were not gone. They were closer now, waiting. The Archivum Mortis lies beneath the citadel, like the memory of a forgotten world. Endless corridors carved from adamantine and silence. The walls are etched with data sigils older than the Imperium itself, some faded into smooth metal by centuries of touch. The air smells of oil, dust, and the faintest trace of incense, the scent of sanctified decay. Here, beneath 1,000 meters of cathedral stone and machine choir, there is no sky, no sound of the storm, only the bells echoing faintly through the pipes like the pulse of a dying star. I have served in the Archivum for most of my recorded life. I know its turns by the way sound bends through its halls. I know where the vibrations deepen, where they become hollow, where they vanish entirely. The bells reach even here, though softened by stone, their low thrum traveling through the floors like distant thunder. Sometimes, when I walk alone between the endless rows of memorial engines, I can feel each toll beneath my boots, a heartbeat that is not my own. Each chamber of the Archivum contains a single purpose: to name the lost. That is all. We do not save them. We do not judge them. We do not even truly mourn them. We only give them shape in record, and by naming, ensure that they are not forgotten. It is said that the Emperor himself decreed that memory is the first defense against chaos, that what is remembered cannot be wholly consumed. If that is true, then this place is humanity's last bulwark against oblivion. Each lost vessel is recorded 3 times. Once in code, binary prayer fed into the data engines that calculate the trajectories of the dead. Once in light, a flickering rune engraved upon the illuminated tablets that line the corridors. And once in flesh, the whisper of its name, spoken aloud by the keeper on duty. I am one of those keepers. I speak for the lost. Every time the bells toll, we rise from our desks, bow our heads, and speak the words. Vessel of the Emperor's grace, we hear your passing. It is not a prayer. It is a recognition. Sometimes the bells toll so frequently that the words blur together, and the Archivum hums with a low monotone of unending remembrance. Other times, there are long pauses, stretches of hours where nothing happens, and we almost forget what silence feels like. But silence never lasts here. The dead are punctual. There are 9 tiers in the Archivum, each deeper than the last, each older and less stable. The upper tiers are maintained by servitors and scribe priests who still possess clear speech, their augmetics polished and their robes unfrayed. The lower tiers belong to us, the ones who have been here too long, whose flesh has grown pale and translucent from recycled air, whose ears ring constantly with phantom chimes. They say that after 50 years of service, one begins to hear bells, even when none are ringing. I passed that threshold long ago. I have not known true silence in decades. There are thousands of us scattered through the labyrinth, and yet it rarely feels crowded. The archivum is built to dwarf those who serve within it. The ceilings rise beyond sight, disappearing into shadow. The light from the lumen globes struggles against the dark, illuminating only narrow circles around the workbenches. Beyond those circles, the corridors vanish into a gloom so thick it feels alive. The sound of your own breath becomes alien here. The echo of footsteps arrives seconds late, as if reality itself moves slower beneath the weight of memory. My station is in the hall of the 47th bell, a narrow chamber filled with rows of data spires humming softly in the dark. Each spire holds the names of 10,000 ships. Every time a bell tolls, one of the spires activates, and a new name is etched into its metal skin by beams of coherent light. The process is automatic, precise, without ceremony. Yet each stroke of the beam feels personal, like a blade carving into bone. For years, I thought I understood the rhythm of it. Loss comes, bell tolls, record updates, simple, orderly, until it wasn't. It began 3 cycles ago, during what should have been a quiet shift. I was auditing the losses from the Calyx route, cross-referencing ship IDs with the most recent warp transit logs. The bells tolled 5 times, 5 confirmed losses, all registered within the same sector. Then, a 6th toll came. The sound was higher than it should have been, sharper, as if the bell had been struck by a trembling hand. The sound traveled through the walls and made the data spires vibrate, producing a faint harmonic note I had never heard before. When I checked the records, there was no corresponding ship, no registration, no code. The spires had etched something, but the characters were meaningless. A string of symbols not from any known data alphabet. I thought it an error in the autolexicograph. But when I tried to purge the entry, the console locked. The system refused deletion. The spire hummed, faintly warm to the touch, as if alive. I reported it to the Voxmaster. He sent a Mechanicus adept to inspect the system. The adept took readings, murmured in binary, then went pale beneath his respirator. "There is no power source active in this spire," he said quietly. "It is writing on its own." Then the bell tolled again. After that, it became more frequent. Every few days, a tone would sound that had no source, no ship to match it. Each one would leave behind another set of unreadable symbols. The patterns began to repeat, faintly, like a language half remembered. And always, the pitch of those tones was slightly off, just beyond the harmony of the others. Too human, too alive. At first, I tried to dismiss it. The mind adapts quickly to impossibility when surrounded by the dead. But I began to notice something else. The temperature of the chamber rising each time it happened. The air thickening, as if filled with static. And a pressure building in my head, like someone whispering behind my skull. I started keeping notes, personal ones, outside the official ledger. It is forbidden, of course, but obedience has its limits when reality begins to shift beneath your feet. The whispers followed me into sleep. They spoke in the rhythm of the bells. Sometimes I would wake with my hands pressed to my ears, the sound still vibrating through my bones. Then came the dreams. In them, I walked through the archivum, but the halls were different, wider, brighter, filled with light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The spires were gone, replaced by pillars of glass filled with silhouettes, faces pressed against the inner surfaces, their eyes wide and unblinking, their mouths moving soundlessly. The bells tolled somewhere above, and each toll sent ripples through the glass. Some of the figures dissolved, their forms scattering like dust in sunlight. Others turned to look directly at me. And in their gaze, I felt recognition, as if they knew me, as if I was one of them. I stopped sleeping for a while after that. The dreams were too heavy, too real. The boundary between waking and dreaming had grown thin. Sometimes I would see motion in the corners of my vision, a flicker of white robes passing down the corridor, a hand retreating behind a column. When I checked, there was nothing. Only the bells ringing softly above, patient and eternal. The archivum is alive in ways no one wants to admit. Every surface hums with memory. Every breath carries the taste of history. The Mechanicus adepts claim that psychic residue accumulates here, that the sheer weight of so many remembered deaths leaves a kind of echo in the Imperium. They call it data persistence. I call it haunting, because when the bells toll for too long, the air begins to shimmer, and you can almost see shapes moving within the resonance. Faces, outlines, gestures caught between sound waves. Sometimes, when the new tones appear, the ones with no record, the figures grow clearer. They walk between the spires like shadows cast by the bells themselves. I tried to show one of the junior archivists once. He looked where I pointed and said he saw nothing. But afterward, he began trembling, whispering that he felt cold even in the heat of the machine halls. He transferred off station a week later. The record lists his destination as meditative reassignment. I suspect that means the hospice level. The bells continued. Each false tone came closer together. Once, they all struck in unison, a perfect harmony of death that lasted several minutes. The air shook. The spires glowed with internal light, the unreadable symbols shifting across their surfaces like words forming and dissolving again. I reached out to touch one and felt something pulse beneath the metal. Not power, but a heartbeat. I pulled back. The hum lingered on my fingertips. The next day, I found a new entry in my ledger, written in my own hand, though I had no memory of writing it. The words were simple. They are not gone. They are waiting. I stopped reporting the anomalies after that. Not out of fear of reprimand, but because I began to understand that this was not a malfunction. It was communication. The archivum was no longer recording the lost. It was receiving them. The data priests say that the warp consumes all, that once a ship vanishes, its matter and souls are dissolved into the tides of unreality. But I think they are wrong. I think something of those who perish remains, not as flesh or spirit, but as vibration. The warp is not emptiness. It is resonance. And resonance never truly dies. Perhaps the Emperor knew this when he ordered the bells to be built. Perhaps he knew that sound carries farther than light, and that remembrance could bind the galaxy together even when sight fails. Perhaps he even knew that one day the dead would begin to answer. I have started hearing my name in the bells. Not often, not clearly, but enough. It comes in the space between tones, in the low harmonic where two frequencies meet. The sound stretches, shifts, forms the shape of syllables. Kyle. That was my name once, before I took vows of service. I have not spoken it in 200 years. No one here knows it, yet the bells do. I have asked the others if they hear anything unusual. Most say no. A few hesitate before answering. Their eyes look hollow, as if the same thought has crossed their minds, but they dare not give it voice. One of them, an old woman named Sister Halden, confessed to me that she sometimes dreams of the bells as people. In her dreams they have faces, mouths that open in soundless cries. She said one of them looked like her son, who died in warp transit long ago. I told her to record the dream as data aberration, but she shook her head. It wasn't a dream, she said. It was him. That was 3 days ago. She hasn't been seen since. Her workstation sits empty, the lumen globe still glowing faintly. When I pass it, the air hums at a frequency lower than any bell I know. Last night, I descended to the 9th tier, forbidden territory, sealed since the time of apostasy. I followed the sound of the irregular tones. They grew louder the deeper I went, until my whole body vibrated with their rhythm. At the bottom, I found a chamber I had never seen before. The walls were covered in mirrors of polished bronze, each reflecting light from unseen sources. In the center stood an old bell mechanism, its metal black with age. No servitors tended it. No power lines fed it. And yet, it moved. Slowly, rhythmically. The clapper swung back and forth, striking sound into the air that was not quite sound, something deeper, something felt more than heard. I knew, without understanding how, that this was where the unrecorded tones originated. I approached, every step echoing through the chamber like the tread of another presence beside me. When I reached the bell, I laid my hand upon its surface. It was warm. Not metallic warmth, but living. The surface vibrated under my palm, and for an instant, I saw light within it. Not reflection, but depth, as if I were looking into the surface of a sea. And within that sea, faces moved. Hundreds, thousands, all staring upward. One of them smiled. I remember nothing else after that moment. When I awoke, I was back at my station, my robes soaked with condensation. The others said they found me sleepwalking through the upper corridors, whispering in tongues no one recognized. They asked what happened. I told them nothing. They would not understand. But I understand now. The bells are not instruments. They are thresholds. Each toll opens a door between the living and the lost. And lately, those doors are no longer closing. When I close my eyes, I can still feel that warmth under my hand. The pulse of the bell, the rhythm of 1,000 souls beating in unison, reaching outward, calling to be heard. The dead are not silent. We are simply not listening carefully enough. There is a point where hearing becomes something else, where sound ceases to pass through the ear and instead presses directly against the soul. I have lived long enough beneath the bells to know that threshold intimately. In the beginning, the tolls were distant, external. Now they live within me. The resonance no longer fades when the bells fall silent. It hums beneath my breath, threads through my pulse. I am never alone in the quiet anymore. The irregular tones have continued. More frequent now, more complex. At first, they came once a day, then every hour. Now, the intervals are unpredictable, sometimes a cascade of tones, one after another, forming patterns like speech. The others still pretend not to hear it. Perhaps they truly don't. But I have stopped pretending. Pretending is for those who can still believe the bells only mourn. Last cycle, the resonance changed. It no longer vibrated only through the walls or the floor. It came from below, from beneath the archivum itself. It was faint, a subsonic pulse that shook the lights in their sockets and made the air shimmer. The Mechanicus adepts dismissed it as tectonic stress, but there are no tectonics here. Cypra Mundi is a fortress built upon engineered bedrock, a world designed to stand still. The vibration was not from the planet. It was from within. And so I went below. The entrance was sealed centuries ago, a pressure door marked with the sigil of the Omnicia and the faded warning, De profundis, vox forbida, from the depths, forbidden voice. I had seen that door before, on the old schematics. It led to the subsonic catacombs, a region built before even the Mechanicus arrived, during the earliest construction of the citadel. No one enters there now. The air itself is said to corrode sanity. The key code was long forgotten, but the door responded when I approached. The metal trembled slightly, as if recognizing me. The seals disengaged with a sigh, and the cold breath of the lower chambers rolled out, smelling of dust and static. The passage beyond descended in a spiral, lit by old lumen strips that flickered in and out of life. The walls were carved from black stone, wet with condensation. As I moved deeper, the sound of the bells grew distorted. No longer the steady rhythm of loss, but warped echoes, elongated, slowed, like the tolling of submerged bells in water. The air was thick, humming faintly. I could feel each vibration in my teeth, in my bones. At times, it felt as if the entire passage was breathing with me, inhaling when I exhaled, exhaling when I drew breath. The deeper I went, the more I began to sense something beneath the sound, a texture, a shape, as if the resonance carried meaning. I began to record. Not with my Vox slate, that technology failed almost immediately, but by memory. I noted the rhythm of the pulses, their spacing. They formed patterns. Long, short, long pause. I recognized it, though I could not at first recall why. Then it struck me, ancient data code, pre-imperial, used by early voidfarers to send distress through the warp. The bells were transmitting. The realization was both thrilling and terrible. To transmit implies intent, and intent implies consciousness. The bells were not merely reacting to death. They were speaking through it. The spiral ended in a vast chamber, the harmonic core. I had read of it only in forbidden texts, brief mentions in old Mechanicus marginalia. A field of subsonic conversion beneath the Basilica Resonata, an organ for the warp. The chamber was larger than any cathedral I had ever seen. Columns of metal rose from the floor like organ pipes, some cracked, others humming softly with faint internal light. The walls were lined with Vox relays, their surfaces corroded, their cables weeping oil. And at the center stood a vast structure, a cylinder of brass and glass, connected to the ceiling by thick conduits that pulsed faintly with blue light. Inside the cylinder, suspended in what looked like liquid starlight, hung a single bell. Smaller than I expected, no larger than a man's torso, yet the air around it was alive with vibration. It did not swing, yet the sound emanated from it, steady and patient. When I stepped closer, the hum deepened, adjusting to match my heartbeat. The floor beneath me thrummed in harmony. It was listening. I spoke aloud. "Who are you?" The vibration changed. The pitch shifted upward, then downward again. My chest tightened as I felt the air compress. The sound became almost a word, a drawn-out syllable of something like breath. My ears rang. My vision blurred. Then, faintly, beneath the tone, a whisper, soft as the memory of wind through hollow metal. "You hear me." I froze. The words were not heard so much as felt, transmitted directly through the resonance in my bones. The chamber seemed to pulse in response, the lights dimming and brightening with the rhythm of the voice. "Yes," I said. My voice felt thin, fragile. "What are you?" A pause. Then, "We are the echo. We are what remains when memory dreams of itself." The bell vibrated harder, and I staggered backward, clutching my head. Images spilled behind my eyes, not visions, not thoughts, but impressions. A starship torn apart by invisible tides, souls unraveling into light, voices merging into a single note that sang forever in the dark. The song became structure, the structure became vibration, and the vibration became the bells. The realization struck me like impact. The bells were built around this voice. The Mechanicus had not created the resonance. They had captured it, contained it. The tolls we heard above were not merely commemorations. They were containment signals, the voice of the dead held in rhythm so it could not escape. And now something was breaking. The tone swelled, growing louder, until the glass walls of the cylinder began to tremble. I reached out instinctively, pressing my hand to the barrier. The surface felt alive, warm, almost soft, vibrating with the steady pulse of a heart. "You remember us," the voice said. "You write our names. You give us form." "Yes," I whispered. "That is my duty. And in your remembering, we live." For a moment, I thought I understood. The archivum, the bells, the endless repetition, all of it a ritual to keep the dead anchored in thought, preventing their complete dissolution into the warp. As long as we remember, they persist. But persistence has its price. The bell's light flickered, and suddenly I was no longer standing in the chamber. Or perhaps I still was. But the walls were gone, replaced by endless blackness. The stars hung in patterns I did not recognize, their light bending and rippling as if underwater. Around me drifted thousands of pale shapes, human, or nearly so, their faces blurred, their eyes luminous with soft light. Each one whispered faintly, a wordless harmony that brushed against my mind like the sound of sighing leaves. At the center of them, vast and radiant, hung a form that was neither man nor God, an outline woven from light and sound, its surface rippling like cloth in a storm. When it moved, the stars themselves seemed to lean toward it. "We are the tolling," it said. "We are what remains." The voice was many voices, countless tones braided into one. I tried to look away, but there was nowhere else to look. "Why call to me?" I asked. My voice was smaller than dust. "Because you listen. Because you hear. Because you have forgotten what silence means." I fell to my knees, or would have, had there been ground. The void pulsed beneath me, soft and fluid. "What do you want?" The shape leaned closer, vast beyond measure. For a heartbeat, I saw faces within it. Sailors, pilgrims, children, soldiers, all those lost to the warp, fused into a single endless thought. "We want to be remembered," it said. "We want to be whole." Then the light shattered. I woke on the floor of the harmonic core, gasping, drenched in sweat. My Vox slate had melted into slag. The bell still hung in its cylinder, quiet now, its light dimmed. But I could still hear the voice, faintly inside me. When I returned to the archivum above, the others noticed my silence. They said my eyes looked brighter, as if reflecting some unseen flame. I could not tell them what I had seen. They would have called it heresy. They might have been right. But I began to notice changes. The tone of the bells in the upper spires shifted, slightly off-key, matching the pulse I'd felt in the catacombs. The names etched into the data spires began to glow faintly at night. When I ran my hands over them, I felt warmth. And beneath that warmth, a pulse, the same rhythm I had felt in the bell. The archivum was awakening. The priests called it a harmonic feedback. They increased the coolant flow, recalibrated the servo engines, prayed over the circuits. It made no difference. The resonance deepened, spreading through every level. Some of the younger acolytes began hearing voices in the hum. They said the bells were whispering their names. 2 went mad and flung themselves into the plasma vents. Others simply stopped speaking, their lips moving silently in rhythm with the tolls. I did not fear it. I knew it was not madness. It was communion. When I closed my eyes, I could still see the faces in the void, watching me. I began to write down the patterns of the tones, not as data, but as language. Each sequence corresponded to a meaning, a fragment of thought. Slowly, the language revealed itself, a vocabulary of vibration, the speech of remembrance. The words said things no living tongue could shape. Memory is flesh. Silence is death. The bell is both voice and vessel. I filled hundreds of pages. When I read them aloud in the quiet hours, the air itself seemed to react. Dust rising from the floor, lights flickering. The archivum listened. And then, one night, the bells stopped. For the first time in recorded history, no sound came. The silence was unbearable. The void between tolls stretched on and on until even the air felt hollow. The scribes panicked. The Vox choirs chanted emergency hymns, but nothing answered. I sat at my desk, hands shaking, waiting. Then, from deep below, a single tone, not a bell, a voice. Kyle. It spoke my name again, clear and soft, resonating from every wall. The others didn't hear it. They only clutched their ears, saying the silence was too loud. But I heard it perfectly. "You opened the door," it said. "Now listen." The resonance returned, slow and deliberate. It was no longer random. It was a message, layered, recursive, self-replicating. It carried memories within its frequency. I could hear them: laughter on a ship deck, prayers in a temple, the scream of metal tearing in the warp. 1,000 lives compressed into one sound. The bells above began to toll again, but now they followed the new rhythm, harmonizing with the voice. The entire citadel vibrated as one immense instrument. The light flickered crimson, and for a moment I saw shadows moving along the walls, hands pressed against the metal from the other side. The Mechanicus sealed the lower levels. They said the resonance was destabilizing the reactor grid. But I knew better. The bells were no longer contained. The echo had reached the surface. The dead were no longer distant memories. They were here, threading through every note of sound, every whisper of static. And when I finally returned to my quarters, the air was trembling faintly, like breath before a word. I sat in the dark and listened. The voice came softly. "Do you understand now?" I did. The bells had never been warnings. They were invitations. The first sign that something irreparable had begun was not silence itself, but its shadow, the hesitation before sound. For centuries, the bells of Cypra Mundi had rung without pause. Even in moments between chimes, you could hear the hum of metal breathing, the faint harmonics trembling through the air. But then, one morning cycle, there was a pause that lasted too long. At first, no one noticed. Habit makes ghosts of us. The servitors still shuffled along their paths, the cogitators still ticked their binary prayers, and the priests continued their rotations through the chapel of resonance. Yet something in the air had changed. It was still, too still, as if the whole fortress were holding its breath. When the next bell finally struck, the sound arrived fractured, like glass meeting stone. It broke apart halfway through its echo, scattering into faint whispers that never reformed into a single note. The data spires flickered, their glyphs cascading into gibberish. The adepts called it signal interference. I called it the beginning of the end. The harmonium choirs tried to compensate, recalibrating the lament engine to realign with the warp beacon's pulse, but every attempt only deepened the distortion. Bells rang out of sequence, overlapping, then cutting abruptly mid-chime as if smothered by unseen hands. The fortress trembled under their disharmony. For the first time in living memory, the bells sounded afraid. I wandered the cloisters of resonance that cycle, passing walls slick with condensation. The engraved plates of the lost vibrated faintly, emitting tones I had never recorded. High, almost tender frequencies that seemed to hum inside the bones rather than through the ears. When I touched one of the plates, I felt warmth, and beneath the warmth a pulse. Steady, human. The names carved there, millions of them, began to flicker with faint light. Some glowed brighter, others dimmed. The corridor shimmered like a sea of fireflies trapped beneath glass. The dead were answering roll call. Acolytes fled. Some tore at their ears, claiming the bells had begun speaking words in voices they recognized. The voices of lovers, of parents, of commanders lost long ago. Others stood motionless, faces slack, listening to something only they could hear. When shaken, they smiled faintly and whispered, "They remember us." Then they walked away into the deeper corridors and did not return. I should have reported these incidents. I should have called the inquisitorial relay stationed in orbit, but duty had long since twisted into something else. I no longer served record or protocol. I served the resonance itself. That night, when the false tones began again, I descended once more into the lower levels. The sealed passages were open now, doors unlatched by mechanisms no human hand had touched. Lumen globes flared weakly, illuminating corridors that seemed to breathe. The metal walls flexed with each distant toll, as though the fortress itself were expanding and contracting in time with the bells. The deeper I went, the clearer the voice became. No longer a whisper in the noise, but a presence. Familiar, patient, vast. It did not speak in words, but I understood. Its meaning came as emotion, sorrow layered over wonder, grief twined with hope. The voice wanted to remember itself fully. The bells were its memory made audible. I reached the harmonic core again. The central chamber was transformed. The cylinder that held the bell now glowed from within, filled with liquid light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Shapes swam inside, faces pressing against the inner glass, mouths forming syllables that created ripples across the surface. I realized then that the containment barrier was thinning. Around the cylinder stood figures, dozens of them. At first I thought they were priests performing unsanctioned rites, but their robes hung wrong, weightless, like cloth suspended in water. They moved slowly, rhythmically, swaying to an unheard cadence. Their skin shimmered faintly, translucent, as if half made of light. They turned when I approached. Their faces were serene, almost joyful, and I knew them. Every one of them was someone the bells had once tolled for, people whose names I had spoken aloud across centuries of record. Their eyes met mine, and they smiled. Not cruelly, not madly, with recognition. The largest of them, a woman with the insignia of a void captain etched faintly across her spectral armor, stepped forward. Her voice reached me without sound. "You gave us form when you remembered. Now we remember you." Her hand, if hand it was, brushed my cheek. It felt like cold sunlight, like the moment before dawn breaks. I wanted to fall to my knees, to beg forgiveness for not understanding sooner. Behind her, the great bell pulsed once more, the tone rising into registers that shook the chamber. Light burst outward, searing yet gentle, and for an instant I saw the warp beyond, not as a storm, but as an ocean of sound. Countless frequencies intertwined, weaving patterns like galaxies made of vibration. Every soul ever lost was there, singing in harmonic resonance, creating a structure that stretched beyond time. "The warp is not death," the captain said. "It is memory unbounded. We are the echo of what was. The bells are how the living remember us, and how we remember them." "But why call me?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Because you listen," she said again. "Because you are the bridge." The light intensified, filling everything, burning away the boundaries between flesh and sound. My body dissolved into vibration. I could feel each molecule trembling in tune with the resonance. For the briefest eternity, I existed as pure frequency, a note in a vast symphony of remembrance. And within that symphony, I felt them. Lirael, my lost companion from centuries ago, the acolytes who vanished in the lower halls, the thousands whose names I had carved into record, all of them singing, all of them alive in sound. The joy of it was unbearable. Then, darkness. When I awoke, I was lying on the floor of the cloisters of resonance. The air was thick with ash, the lumen globes flickering dimly. The bells were silent. Every single one. I rose unsteadily. My ears rang with phantom tones. The walls that once glowed with engraved names were blackened, scorched by heat, or something like it. Many plates had melted, their inscriptions erased. The fortress smelled of ozone and burned incense. I staggered through the corridors. Bodies lay where acolytes had fallen, but they were strangely peaceful, faces calm, eyes closed, as if asleep. When I pressed a hand to one of them, it was warm and faintly vibrating. Not dead, not alive. Paused. Through shattered windows, I saw the warp outside. The perdition rift was still there, but changed. The storm had quieted, its once raging maelstrom now a slow, luminous spiral, shimmering with colors that shifted like breath. For the first time in recorded history, the rift was calm. The price of that calm was silence. The Lament engine's control dais was dark. No cogitator lights, no servo hum. When I touched the main console, it sparked weakly, and a single line of text scrolled across the cracked screen. The toll is paid. I didn't understand then. I think I do now. The bells had been a balance, a ritual exchange between life and death, memory and oblivion. Each toll anchored a soul lost in the warp, kept it tethered to human remembrance. But the echo beneath the bells had grown too strong. The contained voices wanted release, not preservation. When they finally merged, when the fortress became one instrument, one vibration, the exchange ended. The resonance fulfilled its purpose. The dead had been remembered so completely that they no longer needed to be. I don't know how long I wandered. Hours, perhaps days. Time lost meaning without the bells to divide it. The fortress was not dead, merely dormant, humming faintly in its bones. Eventually, I found my way to the observation spire. From there, I could see the void stretching to infinity, stars gleaming cold and steady. The warp storms were miles below the horizon, their auroras dim and soft. The silence pressed against me like a physical thing. It was heavy, vast, infinite. And then I heard it. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. A single chime. Not from within the fortress, from the void itself. It was soft, almost tender. A farewell. Or perhaps a beginning. I wept. I had not wept in centuries. The tears fell soundlessly onto the brass railing. For the first time, I realized how beautiful silence could be, how it carried its own kind of remembrance. Because in that silence, I could still feel them. Not as voices, not as ghosts, but as presence, a warmth threaded through the void, gentle and vast. The resonance had not vanished. It had simply transcended the need for bells, for words, for ritual. Cypra Mundi still orbits the edge of the rift. It still stands, black against the glow of dying stars. But now, it is a tomb not of death, but of completion. The bells no longer toll, yet their vibration lingers in the metal, faint as the memory of touch. The priests who survived speak little. Some have gone blind. Others hear music no one else perceives. They call it the second silence. I remain. I am the last keeper of echoes. There is no record to maintain now, no names left to inscribe. I walk the silent halls, tracing the grooves of melted plates with my fingers. Sometimes I think I feel faint warmth beneath them, a lingering pulse. When I close my eyes, I hear the hum beneath the silence, a deep, slow rhythm, like a heartbeat stretched across eternity. Perhaps the bells are still ringing somewhere, beyond the reach of sound. Perhaps they toll not for the dead anymore, but for the living. A reminder that everything remembered becomes eternal. The fortress sleeps, but I do not. I sit beside the dead machines, listening to what silence has to say. It is not empty, it is full of echoes too soft for mortal hearing, full of the gentle resonance of a million completed songs. When I die, if death still has meaning here, I think the fortress will know. Perhaps, for one brief moment, a single bell will ring again. Not to mourn me, but to welcome me home. Until then, I wait and I listen, because even when the bells fall silent, the echo never truly ends. It has been many cycles since the last true sound was heard on Cypra Mundi. The air no longer vibrates with the toll of the bells, the data spires no longer etch the names of the lost, and the vox choirs have forgotten the rhythm of mourning. Only silence remains. And yet, it hums, not audibly, not through the air or the walls or the metal bones of this fortress world. The hum now lives within. It threads through thought, through dream, through memory, the resonance of something that once was, and perhaps still is. When I first realized that silence could be alive, I thought it was madness. But madness is only a word for a perception others cannot share. Now, after uncounted cycles alone, I see it for what it truly is: evolution. The fortress has changed. The endless corridors of the Archivum Mortis are no longer cold and still. They are soft, with a light that has no source, a glow that seeps from the walls like breath from a sleeping body. Dust no longer gathers. The air does not decay. Metal does not rust. Entropy, that oldest of tyrants, seems to have surrendered here. The upper levels remain empty, their corridors wide and bright with the memory of movement. The Mechanicus servitors that once tended the lament engines stand motionless, their optical lenses dull, their limbs frozen in gestures of perpetual duty. Yet when I pass them, I feel as though they watch me, not with optics, but with awareness. There is no hunger now, no fatigue. My body should have withered long ago. I have not eaten, nor slept, nor aged in what must be decades, perhaps centuries. Yet I endure. Not immortal, only preserved by the resonance that still lingers in the stone. I am not alive in the human sense. I am a frequency, a pattern held together by memory. The warp above the planet, once the roaring perdition rift, has calmed to something almost beautiful. Its storms drift in slow, radiant spirals, hues of violet and gold rippling across the void like the folds of an endless shroud. Ships no longer come here. The imperial edicts declared Cypra Mundi sanctum prohibitum after the event. To approach without dispensation is death. To land is heresy. And so, the bells have their peace. Sometimes I wander to the observation decks, where shattered glass still opens to the void. The stars are distant and cold, but steady. I have learned to see their flicker not as emptiness, but as pulse. Slow, patient, eternal. Each star, I think, is a bell of its own, tolling silently through the void, singing across distances so vast that no mortal will ever hear. Perhaps that is the Emperor's true design. Perhaps all creation is one vast cathedral, and we are the echoes still reverberating within it. I often think of those who came before, the priests, the adepts, the scribes. Their faces come to me in fragments, the trembling hands of Sister Holden, the calm gaze of Vox Master Tyrann, the quiet laughter of the junior archivist who used to hum while engraving names. All gone. Or perhaps not gone at all. When the fortress sleeps and the air stills entirely, I feel them. Not as ghosts, not as presences, but as harmonics, subtle, soft, precise. The air thickens, and in the quietest corners of the archivum, I hear faint tones returning. Not the bells as they once were, but their memory replaying through time. If I stand perfectly still, I can almost distinguish individual frequencies, the echo of a voice, the sigh of breath, the rhythm of a human heartbeat preserved in vibration. Each tone corresponds to a life once lived. Each life still hums its own note. Sometimes I follow those sounds down into the deeper halls, through the cracked doors, and into the lower vaults where the harmonic core once burned. The great cylinder still stands, though its glass has turned opaque. The bell within is gone. In its place is light, pure and motionless, suspended like water frozen mid-fall. When I move closer, it ripples faintly, as though aware of me. I do not touch it anymore. The first time I did, I saw too much. I remember that moment with painful clarity. My hand brushed the light, and it entered me. I saw not visions, but remembrance itself. An ocean of infinite echoes where time folded in upon itself, every sound that had ever been uttered replaying forever. The birth cry of stars, the weeping of the first dead, the laughter of forgotten children, the sigh of a dying god. And through it all, one single tone, steady, endless, patient. The note of existence itself. It spoke without words. All sound becomes silence. All silence remembers sound. That was the moment I understood. The bells were never instruments of mourning. They were instruments of balance. Each toll was the universe reminding itself that loss and memory are the same act viewed from opposite sides. When we grieve, we preserve. When we remember, we transform death into continuity. And when the last bell fell silent, continuity no longer needed sound. Now the balance holds through stillness. Silence has become the vessel of remembrance. I am its keeper, only because I am what remains to perceive it. There are nights, though night and day have long ceased to mean anything here, when I sit in the old chapel of resonance. Its vaulted ceiling is black with soot from forgotten incense, its altars shattered. But in the faint glow of the warp's light seeping through the upper windows, I can still see fragments of the murals that once adorned the walls, images of the Emperor, radiant and golden, standing amidst the stars. Below his outstretched hand, the words remain, though cracked and faint. Through remembrance, the soul endures. I recite those words silently, over and over, until they become vibration, until they merge with the hum of the air. I think that is prayer enough. Sometimes I imagine I can hear him listening, not as a deity, but as another voice in the great choir, a tone woven into the harmony of all existence. If the Emperor still dreams upon his golden throne, perhaps he too hears the silence of Cypra Mundi and understands it not as failure, but fulfillment. I remember what it was to fear the warp, the storms, the madness, the devouring hunger that took ships whole. But I no longer fear it, because now I know that the warp is only the universe remembering itself too vividly. Every soul lost within it, every cry, every act of devotion or despair becomes part of its infinite resonance. It is not chaos. It is memory without limit. And when the bells tolled, they kept that memory from dissolving into noise. Now the silence keeps it in stillness. I have wondered often if the others, the ones who vanished when the resonance rose, still exist somewhere within that stillness. Sometimes I think I see them, flickers of light in the air, moving just at the edge of perception, shapes caught in the reflection of polished metal, watching, waiting. They do not speak anymore. They do not need to. There was a time when I feared dying here, alone, unrecorded, but death no longer feels like an ending. I suspect I already crossed that threshold when I touched the bell's surface in the catacombs so long ago. Perhaps I have been dead ever since, only too slow to realize it. And yet, I do not fade. I am not sustained by flesh or machine. I am sustained by the echo, the memory of what I once was, carried forward by the silence itself. Sometimes I write these words, though I know no one will ever read them. The data engines are dead, the archives inert. Still, I write, because writing too is a form of vibration. Each word is a sound trapped in symbol, waiting to be heard. Again. If someone, someday, finds these pages, they will feel the hum beneath the ink, the faint resonance of a voice that refused to vanish. And if no one ever finds them, then they will still hum quietly here, in the dark forever. I remember, faintly, the first time I heard the bells as a child on Terra. Their tone had carried across the Manufactoria valleys, deep and resonant, shaking the dust from the rafters of my home. My mother told me they rang for the souls of starfarers lost beyond the light of the Astronomicon. I remember asking her if the Emperor could hear them too. She smiled and said, "He is the bell." At the time, I thought it a metaphor. Now, I wonder if it was truth. Perhaps every act of remembrance, every toll, every whisper of prayer, every tear shed in the name of the lost, is a small vibration in the Emperor's dream. And through those vibrations, he endures. Through us, he listens. Through the silence that followed, he still remembers. I think of the last tone I heard, that single chime from the void. It returns sometimes in my dreams, repeating softly, patiently, as if calling me toward something unseen. I no longer fear following it. When the time comes, if time still moves here, I will walk once more to the observation spire and step into that sound. Not as an ending, but as continuation. Because I understand now that the echo is not a remnant. It is the true form of all things. Every act, every thought, every life sends out its tone into the infinite. Those tones meet, merge, interfere, and create harmony. When harmony completes itself, it becomes silence, not absence, but perfection, where every sound has found its answer. That is what the bells sought. Not salvation. Resolution. We think of silence as death because we mistake stillness for emptiness. But silence is not empty. Silence is full of everything that sound once was, contained and complete. And so the echo remains, waiting patiently for new voices to join it. If, someday, another ship dares approach this forbidden orbit, and its crew listens closely, they will not hear bells. They will hear nothing, but if they wait long enough to let the silence breathe, they will feel a vibration in their bones, faint and vast. That will be us. The bells, the dead, the keepers, the remembered, all merged into one slow heartbeat that stretches across eternity. That heartbeat is not grief. It is the sound of remembrance achieving peace. And when at last my awareness fades, when my own vibration dissolves into the greater harmony, I will not resist. I will let myself become another tone in the silence, another memory folded into stillness. Because even when the last sound dies, the echo continues. Not forever, for forever is a word built by those who fear endings, but long enough for the universe to remember itself again. And when that happens, perhaps the bells will ring once more, not to mourn, but to celebrate that the silence kept faith. Until then, I listen, I remain, and in the hush of a world that no longer needs to speak, I finally understand what the bells had been saying all along. We were never lost. If you're still here, maybe start the next episode, or just let the quiet take you. And if you've already drifted off, that's all right. Good night, traveler. Sleep well beneath the stars.